Hello, everybody. My name is Kati Lewis. I'm head of ESG at GCX. This is the Beyond Sustainability podcast, and it's the second one of our series, and I'm delighted to introduce the team shortly and welcome you to this podcast. The podcast series of today is Responsible Ethical Solutions and Investments, Myth or Truth. We had a previous podcast way back when, hosted by our CEO, Kevin James, and we decided a few years later, let's see where we are. Things have changed so quickly and vastly, so we would like to have an interesting conversation with a wonderful set of people today. I would like to introduce the panel to you today. Peter Willis. Peter pioneered leadership for sustainability in South Africa from the late 1990s, and for 12 years was African Director of the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, CISL. And since 2014, he has been a freelance facilitator, coach and mentor, and a very interesting person, I can promise you that. He also trains teams in the art of facilitating good meetings and workshops. And he's based in Simonstown. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Kati. Nice to be here.
Lovely that you can join us today, Peter. Then I've got Loshni Naidu. She is the Chief Sustainability Officer at the JSE. And she joined the JSE in August of 2023 and brings 18 years of wonderful experience in the fields of climate change, sustainability services, and ESG. I didn't know this, and this is interesting, but Loshni embarked her professional career as a chemical engineer. That's super interesting, Loshni. My daughter's also a chemical engineer. And she immersed herself in mining, agriculture, chemical manufacturing, and the like. But her passion for increasingly impactful work, and that is what we're going to talk about today, ultimately led her to further consulting roles, and where she crafted effective sustainability solutions for a diverse range of clientele. This includes positions across professional services, banking, and accounting fraternities. David Coultridge, lovely to meet you and to introduce you to the panel, David. David is an independent investment stewardship consultant, and he recently served as a judge for the International Corporate Governance Network, the ICGN, Global Stewardship Disclosure Awards of this year. And he's currently assisting a listed wealth and investment manager to integrate responsible investment into their investment portfolios. Very interesting, and I'm hoping that you're going to speak a little bit about that today. David was head of SA engagement at 91. He worked with the investment teams to help develop and integrate responsible investment practices. Prior to 91, David worked at Element Investment Managers as a senior investment analyst and a senior manager at Old Mutual within the unit trust division. David graduated from UCT with a BCom in accounting and as a chartered accountant. He completed his certified financial planner qualification. He holds a graduate diploma in tax law and has also got a master's degree in industrial administration. Looking forward to the conversation, David.
Thank you, Kati. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then we've got Lesiba Kogo. Lesiba is the sustainability professional at Discrepancy, and he holds a BSc Honours degree coupled with over 17 years of experience in the sustainability field, working for multiple multinational companies in pharmaceutical businesses, FMCG, industrial, manufacturing, mining, and healthcare industries. Welcome, Lesiba. Lovely that you can join us today. Okay, so I would like to kick off this conversation. We're talking about sustainability, social impact, ESG, finance, and all of these good things. And it's such a wide topic. But what I would like to do is I would like to set the scene. And then I am going to hand over to the panel with some questions. And then let's see where the conversation goes. We've got an hour and a bit. We would love to engage with the audience. Hopefully we'll have some time to take some questions. And then my hope is that this will spark some additional thought, potentially considering that there might be alternative worldviews, perspectives, and that you might do some things differently that might lead to a better positive impact and doing less harm. So we're dealing with what I would like to call with grand challenges or wicked problems. And it feels like it's an intertwined, interconnected challenge of ecological degradation on the one side, and we have social injustice and inequity on the other. And these are big topics. And in my view, you can't really deal with the one without dealing with the other one. And if you look at it in a siloed approach, you might even have unintended consequences. So when you think about ecological degradation, it's basically saying, well, welcome to the Anthropocene. You know, the previous epoch we had was the Holocene, 12,000 years of fairly stable climatic situation. And then from the 1950s, things escalated with the great acceleration, where you have these hockey stick graphs. And things have just changed dramatically, which has now resulted in global warming, climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution levels, etc. So the 9 planetary boundaries going out of whack, 6 of these boundaries already being, the thresholds being exceeded, etc. And we've got this domino effect. So this is on the one side, exemplified with things like Earth Overshoot Day, Plastic Overshoot Day, etc. And then on the other side, we have social injustice, where there's an unjust and unequal, my Afrikaans English is now coming through, use of resources, access to health, to water, education, the formal economy, etc. And it magnifies into things like climate migrants, climate change migrants, etc. So this is the scene that I would like to set. We've got big challenges that we are facing, but I do believe all is not lost. And there are many things that we can do to take these challenges head on. And how can we be part of the solution as opposed to contributing only to the problems? And this is what we want to discuss today. So we've got a fantastic panel from diverse sectors in the market with, so many years of experience. And let's have a fun conversation and let's see where this goes. So I'm going to start off the conversation by asking, I've given a spiel on what I think these problems and challenges are, but I'd like to hear from you. How do you see the problems, especially from your experience, your expertise, the specific area in which you are operating and functioning in the bigger economic system? David, maybe I can kick off with you, if you would like to.
The first thought I had was that if you're in a position where you have the responsibility to manage client capital and to invest into this unknown future, which is becoming more complex and more challenging, then it would seem to me that if you have tools that can help you make a better decision, then you should use those. So just going back a little bit, in South Africa, a particular governance system has developed over the years with King, starting from a very inclusive approach with King 1, triple bottom line reporting, through to integrated reporting, and now more recently an impact approach. And what they're trying to do is to try and ensure that there's a focus on leadership. We got Peter here on leadership, and it's absolutely critical. But the outcome they're trying to focus on is ethical leadership. And it kind of all starts from there. When you get that wrong, you start the problems. So it's ethical leadership, sustainable returns, effective risk management, and legitimacy. In other words, your license to operate in society. So we've got that, and at the same time, over a period of time, a code called the Code for Responsible Investment in South Africa, CRISA, has been developed. So that gives guidance to investment managers how to integrate, well, not how to, but it encourages them to integrate material, environmental, social, and governance factors into the investment analysis and decision making. And so clearly leadership would be part of that. And we've often found in the investment industry that the companies that get this right, that focus on leadership, focus on their system of governance, tend to get not right, but they're moving further along towards understanding the environmental risks and social issues, and begin to start developing products that are appropriate to deal with those challenges. And I think I'll leave it there at this point.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, David. I think I'm going to draw from your beautiful example of leadership and ethical leadership and jump into a question for Peter. Peter, do you want to respond to that from your perspective as a leader with many years of experience?
Yes, thank you. It's interesting, David, that you point out what really makes a difference, and this is what King has sort of gradually uncovered, is that without strong ethical leadership and proper direction from the leadership, the C-suite, if you like, very little change is going to take place. And it's an interesting word. What does ethical leadership entail? And what strikes me is that ethics is about what fundamentally matters. What do you regard as mattering most in a particular situation, even in your life or in the life of your organization that you're leading? And I've been reflecting quite a lot recently on how money matters way more than it ought to or needs to. And we've built this ethic around, yes, an awful lot of things matter terribly to us, but they don't matter as much as money. And so long as we're sorting out the money, that's our first priority, particularly if you're a company or a government. You've got to make sure that your money's right. And then you can pay attention to, how's the environment doing? Or how are the poor doing? Or how are the weak and the sick, and so on? And I'm just really fascinated by how we've turned money over. This is over literally thousands of years. This is not something new to us. But over that time, we have turned money from a tool and a servant into the thing into our master, which has to be our primary concern. And so if you are the CEO of a listed company on Loshni's stock exchange, then every morning when you get up, you've got to look at the numbers, and it's got to be about the money. And then we wonder why nature comes second, and the weaker in society come second. So I'm going to pin a little flag on our relationship with money, because I think until we've shifted to a different kind of relationship with money, we are really going to struggle to rebalance our relationship with nature and with each other.
Wow, thank you so much, Peter. That is very insightful. And I think money might be a proxy for power. But that's just a thought. Let's not go down that rabbit hole right now. But seeing that you are referring to the JSE and what is the power of money and the relationship of money with nature and society, Loshni, if I could ask you, what is your take on these grand challenges? And if you would like to comment on what David and specifically Peter has said about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kati. And I'd love to just add to what both David and Peter have said. And maybe I'll start with the money concept. And this is something also, it's been in conversations, we've heard about it, but it's this whole short-termism versus long-termism view. If we think about how companies manage money from a financial perspective, it's, the quarterly, monthly budgeting cycle, the monthly reporting, financial reporting cycle, the quarterly reporting, the annual reporting. And even if we look at the financial statements, they're always a historical reflection of performance. And linked to that, and money again, is how we incentivize people. And if we look at the incentives from a short-term versus long-term incentives, CEOs are only in that position for 5 years. And if a company has committed to, for example, net zero by 2050, they are long gone before that company meets those commitments. Yet this incentive structures are not promoting long-termism. So I think, as Peter rightly said, we need to relook, or I think we need to relook and reevaluate this relationship that we have. And then secondly, on the leadership aspect of it, and I think that's also linked to your incentives, right? And how you promote responsible leadership in terms of responding to the issues and the challenges that we face, whether it's environmental or social. But maybe just a bit of a reflection on, my varied experience around working with different, boards and execs. It's it is easier to affect change and for companies to play a positive role in the societies that they operate if you have board and executive buy-in who actually understand the issues and the challenges as you've laid out, Kati. If there is buy-in, if there's real understanding and a real drive to actually do the right thing, to support and fix issues. But if you just get lip service, it's a lot more difficult and it's a lot more challenging in trying to convince people that you have to do the right thing or you have to respond to the environmental or social challenges. Otherwise, we're not going to be here in the way we are. And the future is looking bleaker and bleaker if our responses are as limited in some instances. So thanks for that, Kati, but I echo both what David and Peter are saying.
Yes, Loshni, I totally agree with you. Can I just, as a side note, I now understand why we very specifically selected this panel. It's great to have a different view on life, but on the important things, if you have a meeting of minds, and I subscribe to what you were saying. Lesiba, as having been an executive in the corporate space for so long, and you've now heard the comments specifically of Loshni, of Peter, of David, do you want to give us your view of how you see these grand challenges and how you've experienced it in your position?
Thank you. What is important is we need to understand that businesses are in business to make money, and their sole responsibility will be that of making money. But how do we then strike a balance? I mean, going back to what you just said in terms of we've got environmental challenges, we've got social challenges. What do we then do if you're living in such an ecosystem? I think it goes back to governance and ethics. I mean, as an organization, you need to be able to realize what are those material aspects that you need to look at. And failure to do that will look at organization focusing wrong areas. I mean, we cannot solve for for everything, and that's not what everybody's supposed to be doing. But now, the moment you define is when you'll be able to money in the right direction, and that creates long-term value. And we're not talking value; we're talking sustainable value. But now, given the challenges in South Africa, are we saying that we need authority or legislation to force organizations to integrating ESG measures into their organization financing? I don't think it's right. I think it needs to be an ethos thing that says, as an organization, what do you solve for? And once we understand what we solve for, we'll realize that the scope is quite large and you can't solve for everything. But within your operating environment, you can clearly channel those investments in the right direction to make them as impact.
Finding that balance between trying to solve everything and understanding that we're dealing with these big challenges, right? There's a reason why these problems are called wicked problems or grand challenges, because they are so intractable that personally I don't think one person, one company, one country can solve them on their own. It's about finding ways how you work together. And then, Lesiba, as you were saying, what do you solve it for based on ethos? I'm going to turn to you, David. We understand that money makes the world go round, right? And that money is a powerful lever for change. Can you give us some examples of how money can be a force for good and how it can be applied to try and solve these problems?
The big questions. So I'm just going to go back 10 years ago when we last had a similar discussion like this with GCX. At that point, if you looked at remuneration systems that Loshni talked about a little bit earlier, they tended to be focused purely on the earnings of the company. And a little bit before that, if you looked at the platinum industry, it was purely earnings. There were the platinum price was sky high. The executives were paid a significant amount of money, and very little was done in terms of going beyond that, in terms of dealing with the community, water issues, the safety issues, etc. And a lot of those executives just walked away at that point. Come forward a number of years, systems of remuneration are different. So that's the first point. In the system of governance or system of leadership, you have to get executives focusing on implementing strategy, but they need to understand they operate in this world of stakeholders and they have to take account of their most material stakeholders. So you need to think about your workers, the safety issues, your customers, safety around your products, etc., etc. So the executives today are incentivized on a number of variable factors, including things like safety in the mines, specific targets in respect of climate change in terms of their strategy to move to a low carbon economy. So that has changed. And then if, back to what I said earlier on, that if you are investing into this unknown environment and it's client money, you have to do everything possible to understand the factors that could impact the earnings of this company, money, cash flows, the capital that needs to be spent, the valuation of this company. And those risks are challenging from this conversation. We would all understand that climate change issues and safety problems within a mine, etc. You know that it's going to happen at some stage, but it's really uncertain when it could impact the particular company, the particular business, and the earnings of that company. So that's why you need individuals running these organizations who have the ability to deliver on the strategy and at the same time have the balance to think about these really complex, wicked problems. And the incentive systems are starting to adapt to be able to deal with that as well.
Thank you, David. I like your answer, and it reminds me of the JSE guidance documents. Lashni, you know, in the governance section, it talks about remuneration, it talks about incentives that you were talking about, KPIs, targets. If you focus on the 6 capitals as opposed to the 6 capitals of value creation in the integrated reporting framework as a representative of the broader environment that you're working with. So not just financial KPIs, but manufactured, which is in the economic space, but also social and relationship capital, natural capital, intellectual capital, skills and capabilities. And I believe it's very well articulated in the reporting guidance documents and also the listing requirements. Do you want to give us a bit of a response on how does the JSE see its responsibility, and what are the things that the JSE is doing to move the dial from a pure profit play to a broader interpretation of what does responsible and ethical leadership look like and implemented in real practice?
That's quite a question, Kati. Thanks. I think we are fortunate because our CEO, Dr. Leila Fourie, I think represents or embodies that ethical, responsible leadership because she is such a huge proponent of sustainability. She is front and center in having those conversations and advocating for and behalf of Global South, in the various sustainability conversations that she has, and that filters down through the organization, so that you'll see, as part of our sustainability strategy, we've got a few elements, and I'll touch on that in a moment, but with her leadership. And that's why, the point I made earlier, that if you do have leadership that actually embodies this, it makes it easier as the Chief Sustainability Officer to engage, to roll out programs and initiatives. Yes, there's a few other challenges, but you're not having that conversation about why are you doing this? What is it for? What is the impact? There's no need to actually justify that. But coming back to the JSE as a whole, so a part of our sustainability strategy, one of the key elements is advocacy. So this is where we participate, engage, talk to, and it's really about how do we shift the dial on some of these issues, and we do that through advocacy. So this is where we participate in various organizations, forums, associations, etc., where we're part of a conversation that drives change. A part of a conversation that looks at what is in the best interests of the country, what's in the best interests of the continent, or from a global south perspective. So the other element is the education, the awareness, the capacity building. And you mentioned the JSE guidance. I mean, that's just one part of it, where we put out guidance in this instance that tries to support companies who are, whether you're starting out on the sustainability reporting journey or you've been doing it for years, but gives you enough information and context to navigate this world. Because, I mean, we've all seen this reporting landscape is evolving quite rapidly, and it's quite a challenge to actually stay on top of everything. The other element of the guidance that was really important for us is that it gives a South African perspective. Kati, you mentioned, the pay, the remuneration structures, but if you look further, it talks to gender pay gaps, other social issues that are relevant and contextual to us as South Africans. In terms of education and awareness, I mean, one of the big examples that I have is just last week we had our sustainability showcase, and it's a 2-day event. The first portion of that event is where we ask companies in the country to talk to us and share their sustainability journeys. What have they learned? What have they evolved? How has their strategy evolved? Where are they going? And how are they thinking about responding to these environmental and social challenges? And it is really amazing to see how companies have evolved in the last 10 to 15 years and how they are thinking about solving some of these wicked problems. And then the rest of the showcase, the day and a half, is really about thought leadership, capacity building, having some of those difficult conversations about topics that matter to us in the country. And I'll give you an example. One of the topics we unpacked was CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, because we know that quite a few of the companies in the country, multinationals, this is a challenge. So it's looking at how do we provide that information so that you have it at hand that helps you with implementation, decision making, and thinking about how to evolve your sustainability strategy, as an example. Sorry, I've talked quite a bit. I'll stop here for a moment.
No, that was lovely. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Loshni. I want to pick up on what you were saying about how are you part of the conversations about things that matter and to move the dial and to bring about change. I like that. Peter, I would like to ask you to come into the conversation here as a facilitator of workshops and also facilitating difficult conversations and difficult positions. Where you have people with vastly different worldviews, perceptions. Some people see the purpose of a company as purely making money, staying within the rules of the game. Others feel that you have a greater responsibility towards limiting your impact. And then other companies, like, for example, Patagonia, say, well, nature is my only shareholder. My sole purpose is to address these problems. And in the process, we will make money. Can you share some of your insights into these conversations, these workshops that you've had, and your response to what Loshni has said? Thanks, Peter. And then once you're done, I want to ask Lesiba about the conversations that they're also having.
So if you'll forgive me, Kati, that's quite a laundry list of questions you've just given me there, but I'd like to respond to what David and Loshni were saying with the following thought, which is that from the perspective that I'm fortunate to have had, because I started working in this sustainability field about 30 years ago, this sort of organizational sustainability stuff, and listening to Loshni and David, it's really encouraging to hear what I kind of know, but it's easy to forget because I'm not in corporations on a regular basis like I used to be now, that actually partly because of the evolution of people's values across society, partly because of extraordinarily clever instruments like the various King reports and the effect they've had, a little bit because of global governance and what's going on at the UN level and blah, blah, blah. It's now much harder to hide if you are a listed corporation. And so it's great to hear that some corporations are not just trying to hide and failing to hide, but they're actually saying, well, actually, let's do this properly. And what is our responsibility to society, to our communities, to our stakeholders, and nature? I suppose the thing that I would throw in here, though, is that the great lesson that climate science is giving us on a regular basis is that we are moving rather slowly. And I think I've come to the realization for myself that that's just the way it is. That's how we are. We could not have moved faster in response to the danger of global warming than we have. For many, many years, I would have answered that differently. I'd have said, no, come on, we've got to go a lot faster. We're not going fast enough, and so on. And I was quite anxious about that. I'm less anxious now, not because we're doing particularly better, but I realize that there's no point in stressing over something that just is what it is and has been what it has been, which is our quite sort of slow response, because we've been so busy with other things, including making money, that, yeah, we'll get to the climate thing. No, we will, honest. On the one hand, I suppose the other point I wanted to make is that, and it relates to this, is that something we forget we have to deal with on a daily, hourly basis is that we are surrounded by people who live on a spectrum of values, and there are people within, for heaven's sake, mining companies, coal mining companies, whose heart is in what the people in this room would call the right place, who really want to have a less harmful environment and be much gentler with other people, etc., etc. And there are people who are simply in it for themselves. That's the sort of the two ends of the spectrum, and that makes life really complicated, but totally fascinating. Imagine how boring it would be if we all shared exactly the same values. And so, in a way, the bigger the organization that you're in, the more complexity of values you're having to deal with. And you cite Patagonia. Now, Patagonia has the great fortune to be, to my understanding, owned or at least run by one guy and his family. And so you've got a real sort of unity of values. But for South African listed companies, you don't have that luxury. So you have to wrestle with incredible diversity of values. It's a bigger conversation, but that's just where we are. I'm sorry, that doesn't sound like I'm offering any big solutions there, but I think, yeah, I'll leave it there.
I like what you were saying about the values. I agree with you. Life is complex, and there are so many lenses through which you can interpret these things, address this, have a house view, so to speak, of these big issues. Lesiba, I know that you have been working very hard and that there's been such a exponential journey, if I can put it this way, in your space. I would love to hear your views of where you are. How do you plan to implement? What are the challenges that you are seeing? Just give us a taste of your reality.
The why is not as important, but we need to realize that we definitely need to start doing the work. But the why is actually dragging us back, because in my view, Kati, we shouldn't be waiting for the JSE to tell us that we need to do the disclosures that we're doing. We need to invest in communities that we do. No, or what we need from the JSE is the guidance as to how we go about doing it. But as an industry, I think we need to wake up and realize that the why is actually making us to procrastinate in making progress in the ESG space. If companies believed truly that investing in sustainable initiatives form part of their long-term value creation, we will not be in a situation where we get to a point where we incentivize our executives to actually do the right thing. It needs to be comes naturally. But I think it is important that we socialize the importance of long-term sustainability in organizations widely in industry, because that will help us to progress from saying, why are we doing this, to move towards this forms part of our ethos. And then it becomes easier to do. The conversation is no longer about should we invest money, should we not invest money, because we understand that is inherently important. I mean, we saw in the recent months and years that there's companies that actually shut doors, not only because they were not doing great financially, but because they didn't take care of their governance. They had to shut doors. And that, with that said, there is also a token industry. Should the financial indicators, should the non-financial indicators be as important as the financial indicators? I mean, we get into that point where they need to be assured, we need to put them in the executive variable pay. But the discussion is it important or is it not important? And how do we go about doing it? Is it 50% or is it 30%? But what I'm saying is if you want to create a long-term value, say for instance, you are a mine operating in a specific environment, surely doing the right thing and making sure that you give back to that community, it's a noble thing to do, but actually it's creating a long-term value in a sense that you're winning the will of the people where you operate. And those people are the cornerstone of the sustainability of your organization. And the discussion in industry is always about we're waiting for S1 and S2 to come and tell us, what we need to disclose. And then we go about disclosing. Now, the question is it built into our DNA? Or are we disclosing because law said we must disclose? And if that is the case, then we go and window dress, and then we end up, having to look for third-party organizations to come and verify that what we're doing is right. So to me, is that as an industry, as a country as a whole, understanding our socio-economic restrictions that we sit with, we need to get out from an environment where we're asking, why is this important, to understanding that this is actually, we rely on good corporate governance and responsible, sustainable investment for the long-term sustainability of the organization. The discussion we're having is, if I've got 1,000 rands, how much do I need to contribute towards business growth? How much do I need to contribute towards investing in the community? But that question would not be a question if in the design of your organization, in the redesign of existing organization, you've integrated long-term sustainable value as part of your entire value creation. Then it becomes the norm. It becomes easier to make those investments. And Kathy, let me leave it at that.
Interesting. Thank you, Lisiba. So what I take from this is it reminds me of what is the purpose of a company? And it goes back to what you were saying, Peter. So many people have got the different values. So maybe let me ask this question, and I'll ask you first because you're the money person, the investment person, David. Do you think the views of the purpose of a company has changed over the last, say, 50 years? If you think of where we started in the 1970s with the Milton Friedman's, the purpose or the business of a business is business, making money, and that's it, staying within the rules of the game, to where we are now, where we've now got King, we've got corporate governance, we've got shared value creation. What does that mean? Do you think people see the purpose of a company differently now? in the bigger scheme of
Okay,
things?
it's a very interesting question. So first of all, let's just go back a bit. If we think South Africa has been waiting, it hasn't. South Africa came out with one of the best codes of governance in the 1990s. Then a second code for responsible investing, I think it was 2011, just after the UK Stewardship Code. It might have been second, but it was the first to focus on sustainability. It required investors to integrate material sustainability factors into the investment analysis and decision making. So let's go forward now. So here we are, you have companies, and I think companies have changed. There is a lot of thinking about what is the specific purpose of the company. They've realized that if they get that clear and they communicate it well, it's much easier to lead the organization. It's also much easier to have the conversations with the investor. And then we come back to the point that you made earlier, and I think Loshni made it, of what is important. Peter made the point as well. Things that matter. This world is complex, and we have to find a way to get to what really matters for the organization. How can you lead the organization unless you're clear about that? How can you incentivize your people unless you're clear about your purpose and what is important? And then I just want to touch on what Loshni was talking about, and I think Lasiba picked on it as well in terms of disclosure. If you're clear about your purpose, you don't need 200 to 300 pages of integrated reporting. It's just crazy. But it's because stakeholders, investors, don't make it clear to companies exactly what they're looking for. So you will have integrated reporting, and you'll have professional service providers who create 200 to 300 pages of beautiful pictures and some detail. But if you're really clear about your purpose and you engage with your investors and ask them what they're looking for in terms of what is important in your business, in your industry, etc., you can move away from hundreds of pages to something less than 30 pages in your integrated report. It's really about your purpose, your strategy, how you manage risks, what is important in terms of the incentivization side, and the way you allocate capital. That's what investors want to know. And then if you engage with your other material stakeholders, what is it that they need to know? But don't go along with the advisor and just assume that you've got to create an integrated report just like your competitors in the industry. Be brave. Move away from that. Focus on purpose, and just make sure as you do that, that you give enough attention to the sustainability factors as well. In other words, those that are really material and will impact the organization in the future. I've moved away from non-financial sustainability factors. I don't talk about that because at some stage they're going to impact your earnings in the future. And I think let's just leave it at that.
I would like to thank you very much for your response, David. One of the questions you asked is, we have to get to what is really important for the company. So I'm going to ask you a response question, and then I'm going to ask Lashni to respond to your comments. Do you think it's possible, David, to answer the question, we have to get to what is really important for what is a company, without understanding what is really important for that company's stakeholders? So in other words, those people who are materially affected by the company, but equally so, those people, and when I speak of people, I include the natural environment as well, groups of stakeholders.
Absolutely.
Right?
So remember, your customers are part of those stakeholders. How can you run a business if you don't know and understand what is of value to them? How can you run a business if you don't understand your externalities and how that's going to impact your natural capital? You talked about the different forms of capital earlier. If you don't understand that, you shouldn't be running a company. So all of that has to be taken into account. And then it's a lot of work, but at the end of the day, you come to a very clear purpose about what is considered to be valuable to your stakeholders. And it just helps make things a lot easier from that. Now think about that, the overall system of governance, it's about investors and their needs, holding directors accountable, directors holding executives accountable to implement the purpose, the strategy of that company, and regulators making sure that this is actually happening. So again, back to the point, when you actually focused on what matters, isn't it easier to select your directors for the board because you need certain skills? So let's juxtapose that with what I saw in a retail company recently that claimed every single one of its directors were experts in sustainability. Clearly, that was not correct and appropriate. I would much prefer the company acknowledges the need to have deep skills in sustainability going forward, indicating that there is one or two individuals on the board that is currently focusing on it, and what they're doing to bring the full board up to speed on these issues and to ensure that they develop that knowledge and continue to grow and learn to be able to deal with these critical issues in the future.
Thank you, David. I like what you were saying. Lashni, hopefully not a difficult question, but would you like to respond to what David was saying, specifically in relation to the integrated reporting approaches and the comment where you were making to say you actually think you can, if you focus on the purpose, which I subscribe to, understand the purpose of the company and how it impacts the stakeholders, you can actually get to it in a much shorter integrated report as opposed to writing 200 pages. Would love your review on this. And how can integrate, let me rephrase this, think about that, but also how can integrated reporting assist companies to get that critical message across of what is the purpose, why does it matter for this company to exist?
So, Kathy, I'm going to try and answer this with a comment first. Okay, so I want to split this a bit. We want that integrated report to be all things to all people, and that's not its purpose. So I completely agree with David, and I want to split this, that what David's talking about and the way I perceive it is this is action. This is what a company has to do, understanding their value, what value creation means to them, who their stakeholders are, what's the stakeholder expectations, and how do they respond to that. That's all activity and actions. For me, reporting, and I think I've said this, reporting is an end of a process. Even if you look at a process at a cycle, the reporting is your story that you tell. Your reporting is to different stakeholders on different matters which are important to them. So your integrated report or whatever other report that you have shouldn't be the only pieces of communication to specific stakeholders. It can't also be, the most comprehensive report because it's trying to address every single stakeholder's key issues. So I think we do need to take some time to actually apply our minds when we do the reporting. Another challenge I do find, and this is something around the reporting space, is that because we've got different stakeholders, and it talks to, we're trying to get a report. If we do one report, it can tick off all the boxes. And this is a conversation we've just been having internally. So we put out an integrated report, a sustainability report, and we've subscribed to a couple of, external commitments, for example, the net zero by 2050. And we do CDP, etc. And there's a whole host, and I know lots of companies do this, where they do different reporting on similar information or the same information, just tweaked differently because it's going to different stakeholders. And somehow your burden increases because all it feels like is you doing reporting. So I think we've got to relook and rethink this whole reporting space. And I know there's a lot of work going on globally and locally, looking at standards, etc. But coming from a point of view that your reporting is your feedback to your various stakeholders. And how does that make sense for you to get your message across in the most easiest way, where reporting doesn't become the beginning and the end of everything? I personally, there's a lot that's happening in the sustainability space that I think is a distraction, and it's distracting in a way that it takes away from, we need action. Peter, I know you've accepted, I have climate anxiety, but we need action, and we should look at what's distracting us from actually taking that action. I hope that answers some of your questions, Kati.
Kati, can I just chip in a thought there, because I really find this very interesting, what David has raised and Loshni's built on, which is this notion that the report, as Loshni's saying, as a sort of an outcome, has become a thing in itself and too much of a focus. And I liken it to how, in the wake of 9/11, and I don't know if you remember, but some guy put some explosives in the sole of his shoe and got onto an aircraft, fortunately was discovered and so on, so nobody got killed. But that meant that from then onwards, every airport in the world had people taking off their shoes and putting them through a scanner. And because, it only takes one person to test the system with something really dangerous, and the whole world then becomes a suspected criminal. And it got me thinking that I would like to have some way of identifying myself as I'm not a criminal. I simply would never, ever, ever blow up a plane. I would never run over a mouse.
That's really good to know, Peter.
It is. I want everybody in this room needs to know that if you've got a pet mouse, it's safe when I'm around. But my point is that what David's suggesting is the way to break this logjam is to say that you can graduate away from burdensome reporting, because it's just like being treated as a criminal. You need to produce 200-300 pages to somehow prove that you're not a dirty, nasty, careless company. And actually, we all know that that's not. You can hide whatever you like behind 300 pages of reporting. And so I look forward to us discovering much subtler ways for investors and other stakeholders to assess a company's intentions and actions and impacts, rather than having them take off their shoes and go through the scanner every time, and to be assumed to be criminal until proven otherwise, because that's a terrible, terrible place to start.
I agree with you. Two things before we go to the Q&A. Firstly, Loshni, I agree with you. We need action. And secondly is graduating away from this burdensome reporting and getting to the essence of this. And like you were saying, Peter, is like changing the default setting. I think that is something to think about. David, I need your help. I can't read on the screen. So
Do you
we've
think
got some,
I can with my glasses? What
If
are you
you can't
looking for
read-
on the screen?
otherwise Matthew or Chris here can read. It's okay. No questions. Okay. All right. No, that's perfect. I want to wrap this up, and I want to ask a question for each one of you. So just to pull this all together, we started off with a position statement and the problem statement, rather, of we're sitting with these challenges, these intertwined grand challenges of ecological degradation, what we are doing to our planet and what we are doing to society, and how these are so intertwined. You cannot deal with the one without dealing with the other one. We understand we have a challenge. We do also understand that we are hopefully part of the solution, and there are many ways of approaching it. We spoke about what finance can do, what integrated reporting can do, the different views on values, socioeconomic development. Stop asking the why, like Lesibo was saying. Stop looking at other people for us to do things and to procrastinate. And what Loshni was saying is, okay, let's get on with this now. We need some action. So I would like to ask you, each one of you, and then we can close with last thoughts. What do you think are practical, pragmatic solutions that we can consider and actually actioning, that can move the dial towards a better world, a future where we all want, as opposed to further degradation and social inequality? You want to go?
So just taking Loshni's point of waiting and becoming anxious, I'm really surprised at what China has done and has managed to do. I don't know if any of you have been looking at the price of oil and how that's affected petrol. And just after lockdown, you saw the oil price going up as everything opened up. And now more recently, in May, June, July, suddenly it started coming off. And the interesting thing is that not only is it about the possibility of less growth in the world and the concerns around that, but in addition to it, it is the action that China has taken. And yes, we know it's a coal company, and if you're in Beijing, that's where you're going to get your energy from. But if you're elsewhere in the country, it's from renewable energy. And the International Energy Agency is crediting China for some contribution to the reduction in oil price. So I think the point I'm trying to make, and why I'm referring to what's happening in China, is that you've actually got to pick your road. You've got to choose something, focus on it. Of course, they're in a better position politically to be able to do that. They have a number of challenges, but you can get results when you're very clear about your purpose and you want to achieve something. And one last thing I want to share with you. In terms of the electric vehicles, they are producing the most electric vehicles in the world at the moment, something like 60% of all electric vehicles. In the last 2 months, they sold step back. Of the vehicles that were sold, over 50% were electric vehicles to the people of China. And the interesting thing is, if you buy an electric vehicle, you get a green plate. And if you buy a internal combustion engine vehicle, you get a blue plate. And all the young people want to buy the electric cars. Why? They can park anywhere if you've got a green plate. You can go into the city, you can go anywhere. So, sorry, I'm overdoing it, but focus on what really matters and you start getting results.
Thank you, David. Lesiba, if I can ask you.
Thanks, Kati. I think in my travel around the world, I've learned that it's not always about survival. It's about innovation. And so they say if you take a frog that doesn't live in water and put it in water, it will learn how to swim like a fish, right? But are we saying that we need to wait for that instance where we're finding ourselves as South Africa right now, where we've depleted the natural gas resources from Mozambique, that now we need action? And I think that does talk to what David said very well, to say, let's look at value creation. Let's look at wide stakeholder engagement, from ecological to people. And then going back to my comment, what are we solving for? Then that will be clear to say, these are our material issues in front of us. And in our short, medium, and long-term investments, this is how we're going to make sure that we solve for all these material issues that we've identified. Then it becomes easier for organizations to integrate those material factors into the ethos of the organization, which is about how do you create sustainable value. And my other thoughts on reporting is that it's very difficult for organizations right now. Having I've been there myself, we listen to the outside noise, and the outside noise is very loud. Now you have one standard that is coming out, and you've got it from your CEO, from the board, saying, we need to do a gap analysis to understand how we will comply or not. But are we doing it because we want to take that and build it into the ethos of the organization for long-term sustainability? Or are we doing it to tick a box, which will result in short-term gains? And looking at the reporting, if you understand your material aspects, then you move away from the tick box exercise. Where we come from as South Africa, from the time of King to the time of GRI being adopted, we've always went the route of taking the entire GRI requirements, using it as a backbone, and going and creating a report that is 300 pages long that does not make any sense. Now the question is, what are you solving and who are you responding to? But the moment you have identified who your key stakeholders are, what their needs and expectations are, all the guidance documents becomes exactly that, guidance document, and you report on areas where you create long-term value. And I think that is critical in industry, to say, what are those materials that we will need to focus on for us to be in business 10 years from now, right? Maybe it's not net zero. Maybe it's not in our organization. Maybe in organization B it's net zero. So I think creating value where it matters most is the most takeaway that all of us need to take from this conversation. Thank you, Kati.
Thank you, Lesiba. What are the material matters? Creating value where it matters most. I like that. Peter, if I can ask you, and then we can close off with Lashni.
Thanks. Just a short point, and I do enjoy listening to the way you think about this, Lesiba. I feel I could do with more of that. I'm going to take a slightly different tack, because I'm not in the front line of the corporate world these days. And I'm going to say that if you're asking me what is worth doing, given all those grand challenges and wicked problems, I would say a word of caution as a starting point, which is that there is so much that is out of balance and out of kilter and in some cases plain dangerous and socially wrong and so on, and we've only got a short lifetime and, so many hours a day, we'll never be able to make more than a tiny impact. And that can be the source of anxiety and despair, that I go to work every day and all I see is bigger problems than when I went home last night. And, so what can I do? And what I would say is that where I've got to in my own life is that you can only do what you can do with the people and situations that are right in front of you, and be honest about your current reach. And it may change from day to day, depending on what your job is, who shows up, what your role is, and so on. And if you invest the whole of yourself in the conversation you're having with a person or the particular task that you've got in front of you, and you do the best you can, then it's clear, it's past you, and you're on to the next thing. And that is a life well lived. And one could really go neurotic trying to wrestle in one's mind with global poverty, climate change, politics, etc. And I think we would all be much kinder to each other if we weren't neurotic about these big, troublesome issues, and were actually just dealing elegantly and as well as we can with whatever's in front of us. I'm not sure that makes any sense, but there you are. Feet do well on the ground, yes.
We have run out of time. Lashni, I would like you to give your last thoughts, and then I will wrap up. Thank you.
Try and be brief, Kati. I think what I just want to reiterate is really why we're solving for all of the problems, and when we're looking internally, what our value creation is, value proposition, material matters, how we're solving for this, is just not to forget that we are part of a larger system, and that we do need to stick our heads up every now and again and look at, if we want maybe the bigger impact or a wider impact, look at how we could potentially collaborate, partner to have that impact that we want to see. So I'm not trying to say we solve all the problems and we solve everything, but sometimes our reach may be greater if we take a look around us to see who else is struggling with something similar, and how do we support that, and how do we work together. That's my take.
Thank every one of you. Thank you, David, Lashni, Lisiba, Peter. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope it's given some food for thought. And I'm going to summarize with SDG 17. For me, that's the pinnacle. Collaboration, networking, partnerships is too big to do on your own. Understand where you fit into the ecosystem and just take action, but not neurotically. Okay? Keep your feet on the ground, people. Thank you very much. That's a wrap.